When I was 25 and fresh out of college, I started packing up and heading out on my own. I was eager to forge my own path, and it didn't surprise me. I've been the youngest of 5 my entire life, so I'm used to being the youngest. When I say the youngest, I mean someone much younger than me. There's a 7-year age difference between me and Emily, the next oldest. There's a 25-year age gap between me and my siblings. I sometimes felt like I didn't exist in their lives. My parents were always busy with their own things, so I was left to take care of everything. You hear about glass children, who are the ones whose siblings require so much attention that they become, I guess I was invisible or unheard. My siblings were always in and out of hospitals, therapists' offices, and treatment programs. I became the youngest sibling who was fine and didn't need much attention because I wasn't sick or struggling like they were. I didn't create issues, so I went unnoticed. That was it. I don't think it was intentional, but I wasn't a priority. I don't consider my childhood traumatic. I had food, clothing, and basic needs met. Emotionally, though, I felt like I didn't exist. Nobody asked about my day or if I needed help with homework. I learned to entertain myself. My friend was video games, and books provided an escape while my brothers struggled with real issues. I lost myself in fictional universes. I guess it was a way to cope, but at the time I had no idea. I stayed under the radar. I knew I wasn't causing any problems, unlike some of my siblings with sick relatives. I wasn't expected to volunteer as a caregiver. My parents handled all of that, I guess, as a way of protecting me. But in doing so, they neglected me. I didn't get much attention, but I wasn't pushed to grow up too quickly either. When all your efforts are directed toward keeping one or more children alive, the one not in crisis falls through the gap. That was me. It wasn't entirely horrible. By the time I was 9, Laura and Sophie, essentially my saving, had become friends. Their homes were not nice either, but we bonded over that unspoken knowledge. We simply understood each other. We didn't have to explain to one another why we felt invisible or ignored. We would avoid the drama in our own families by spending hours at one another's homes. Laura and S felt more like my actual family than the one I was born into. By the time we entered middle school, like lifeboats amid a storm, we hung close to one another. High school was not much different. My ties with Laura and Sophie became closer while my relationship with my parents stayed remote. Like all teenagers, we experienced ups and downs, yet the 3 of us stayed connected. We graduated together and went to the same university. When it was time for college, it was an obvious choice. We wanted to preserve our small family, not worry about the school or the academics. For years later, we were still inseparable. After graduation, we decided to move to a different state. We wanted to get away from the chaos. We arranged our lives in a small flat. We were out on our own and could focus on ourselves instead of juggling family issues. It was liberating. Not long after my parents. I haven't spoken to my mom much since I moved out, so I wasn't expecting her to suddenly show interest in my life. Sometimes she'd text me like, "How's work?" or "What are you up to?" But we didn't really talk about anything important. I guess it was better that way. I didn't need their attention. Laura and Sophie had their own lives and ambitions. I felt like I wasn't the abandoned child anymore. I was proud of having created my own little family. Last year around this time, my mom called. It had been over a year since we'd spoken on the phone, so when her name popped up on my screen, I knew something was up. Phone calls always raise questions. The last time she'd contacted me was to let me know about she wanted to know what time I was heading home for Thanksgiving. To be honest, I was pretty confused. We didn't really celebrate holidays, so I had no idea Thanksgiving was even on the horizon. When I was growing up, it was pretty rare for us to. Thanksgiving or Christmas celebrations were simply not part of our family tradition. I informed her that I was not on schedule and that I had already made plans for months. Laura, Sophie, and I had been organizing a ski vacation, and I could not cancel it with only 3 days' notice. Additionally, I lived 2 states away and could not afford a last-minute airline ticket. My mother was not understanding when I tried to explain this to her. She behaved as though I was being purposefully difficult and stated that she would be my dad was seeing my brother Mike at the institution he works at. So Thanksgiving my dad would be gone most of the day and she'd be alone. I get it. She gave me 3 days' notice, but I can see why she wanted company. She expected me to do what she got really mad when I told her again that I couldn't make it. She started saying I didn't care about the family. She'd accused me of being selfish. Then she hung up on me. I sat there for a while, feeling a strange mix of remorse and resentment. I felt guilty about leaving her alone. I thought about how they'd been for me. After not hearing from them for months, I was suddenly the bad guy for not dropping everything to get home. I went over my old books looking for something I could have overlooked, but I couldn't find anything. Thanksgiving wasn't mentioned as a time she wanted to visit me. It was just a last-minute guilt trip that confused me more than anything. I texted her later that evening to say I wouldn't be able to make it for Christmas either. We had another trip scheduled, so I told her I'd love to catch up after the new year, but she never answered. I tried to be polite, but it was a few days. I tried to get rid of the strange feeling in my gut, but it stayed. Looking back, I believe that phone call marked only the start of something far more significant. I hadn't seen it coming, but I had no idea how far this catastrophe would extend. After that strange Thanksgiving conversation, I assumed things would cool out. But about a week later, I received a text from my dad. He never texts me. He's more of a talker. So when his name came up on my phone, I assumed it had to be something grave. When I opened it, I was right. I was so surprised by the message that I actually laughed out loud. He said that if I didn't come home for Christmas, he'd stop paying for my college. I had graduated 3 years ago, and there hadn't been any further cuts to the payments. I was trying to keep it light, but I was still taken aback. I thought maybe he'd gotten me mixed up with one of my siblings or something. 3 years without payments have gone by. Maybe you should check your bank account. I figured that would be the last word about it. I figured he'd see his mistake, laugh it off, and that would be that. Still, a few hours later, my phone buzzed once more. This time, the message was more detailed. My dad was really angry. He kept going on and on about how I was selfish and how I didn't appreciate all the sacrifices my parents had made for my siblings and me. He even said I was deserting the family. I was just looking at my phone, amazed at this point. I never once asked them for anything. In fact, I had no idea they felt they were paying for my college. Grandma had paid for all of my expenses, including tuition. To be honest, I was glad she wanted my parents out of that aspect of my life, away from influence. This entire guilt trip my dad was attempting to lay on, I was taken aback. I took a deep breath and replied, "I'm sorry you feel that way, but Granny paid for my college after the holidays. I'd love to catch up, but I already have Christmas plans, so I thought that would be the end of it." But, of course, it wasn't. He brought it up twice more. He said I was rejecting the family, that I didn't care about them, and that they were helping me. He said that if I couldn't try to come home for the holidays, I was simply finished. It was ridiculous. I had been living alone for years. They hardly noticed. When I moved out, it seemed like I was being accused of abandoning the family. I thought about it more and more, and I got angrier. I wanted to dismiss it and just let it pass. After all, they hadn't followed up with me. They hadn't asked whether I needed anything or how I was doing. But as soon as they needed something, I was expected to drop everything and run home. Otherwise, I didn't matter. Felt like I was only a backup plan for them. Someone they could rely on when it would be convenient for them. I was angry, so I contacted Laura and Sophie DeVent. They understood right away. As usual, Laura said it sounded like my parents were just trying to use me to cheer themselves up. "I don't really care if you're there," she added. "Just forget about them. They just want to feel like they've done their job as parents." I needed to hear the truth. I owed them nothing at all. That evening, I chose to sleep on it before answering. I didn't want to say something I might regret. But my phone buzzed again as I lay there trying to let it go. Another text from my dad. This one was brief. "If you don't come home, don't bother coming back at all." I just stared at the screen, frozen. Couldn't believe it. Felt like a punch in the gut. How did we get here? I wanted to respond angrily, call him out on all the times they had. They ignored me all the times I felt like I didn't exist in that house. I just didn't reply, instead putting my phone down and turning over to try to fall asleep. I wasn't going to let this ruin my vacation preparations right before Christmas. I wasn't going to get dragged into family drama. I woke up the next day to several more text messages. This one was from my mother. They were They were just as disappointed in me as they were confused about why I was being so detached. I laughed a little, but it was too late. I'd been far away all my life, and they were only now noticing. I concentrated on getting ready for the ski trip and neglected the books. I'd put months of planning into this, and Laura, Sophie, and I were not going to let my parents drag me down with guilt visits. The next day, we drove. It was the first time in a very long time that I felt free, not thinking about my parents at all. I wasn't feeling bad about it. Spending time with the people who loved me made me happy. But things can't stay calm forever. Right in the middle of the vacation, I got another note from my mother. Just when I thought I could let it go, she sent it. She said that if I didn't return soon, they'd have to start making decisions about the future without me. I realized at that point that it wasn't about Christmas or even the holidays. It was something much larger and more complex. Perhaps it had to do with my brother Mike or with the house. Or maybe it was about the family's money. I knew one thing for sure: whatever it was they wanted me involved in, it wasn't because they missed me for whatever reason. They needed me. It was like a gut check. I had assumed all this time that they were just trying to guilt-trip me into coming home for Christmas. Still, it never concerned me personally. It centered on them. They wanted to spend time with me, which showed they cared. They didn't care whether I was there. I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their mess. I stopped reading their texts and spent the rest of the ski trip with Laura and Sophie. I tried to be present and not think about what was waiting for me back home. We skied, laughed, and drank too much hot chocolate. It was everything I needed to recharge. I felt energized when I got back from the ski trip, but that feeling didn't last. I tried to get back into my schedule after being away from the family for a few days. It felt good to be away from all the family strife, but I knew it was only temporary. A few days later, I got a call from my older brother Nick. We hadn't spoken in months, maybe even more. When I saw his name on my phone, I knew this wouldn't be a casual conversation. I used to believe Nick was the one sibling who might understand me, but he wasn't as sick as our other siblings. I thought our relationship might be better, like with the rest of our family. He was caught up in his own life, so I hesitated. But part of me wanted to know what he wanted. Curiosity won out, and before I could even say hello, Nick started in. "Mom and Dad have been talking about making you the legal guardian for Michael." I was stunned for a second. Someone had knocked the wind out of me. Was this a joke after all these years of hardly being in my life? They were now going to leave Michael in my care. Michael has been in and out of care facilities all his life, so I was taken aback. "What did you mean?" when I asked at last, attempting to keep my voice steady, my heart racing. Nick sighed as though he was offended that I wasn't embracing this news gently. "You know the situation with Mom and Dad." I could feel my blood boiling. They're not going to be around permanently, and they need someone to look after things when they go. They consider me to be that person. I'm still reeling from their indifference and guilt-tripping. I'm offended that they think I'll abandon my life and take on their mess. Nick seemed confused about why I was so upset. "Look, you're the only one with a solid grasp on reality. The rest of us have personal issues. You're the one with your life together." I was so frustrated. I wanted to laugh. What is my life? I had a good career, a place to live, and I wasn't in and out of hospitals. But that didn't mean I was ready to be someone's caregiver, especially not after years of treatment like that. "Maybe you should have thought about this before now." I was getting really frustrated. They never bothered to ask me about this. Nick sounded defensive, like you said, as if everything were already decided behind my back. Until lately, I also knew nothing about this. I was also pretty surprised. I thought you should hear it from me before they tried to spring it on you. This has nothing to do with Christmas. This is a lot bigger than a holiday. Michael's parents they had no idea what my long-term ambitions were. They hadn't even tried to find out whether I would be ready to assume such responsibility. They just thought I would. So I asked. I meant to move back home and drop my entire life, give up all I have worked for to take care of Michael. Nick didn't have a response. I didn't care even then. He tried to explain how tough things were for our parents and how they were managing Michael's care. I had spent my whole life being ignored, and now I was expected to take on this huge responsibility. I wasn't creating issues, and I wasn't the one disintegrating like the others. There was no fairness in it. I had to cut him off mid-sentence. I said, "I'm not doing it. I won't be there. I'm not your backup." Nick was silent for a minute. They didn't care about me for the last 25 years, and they don't deserve to make me answerable for anything now. Then he said, "I get it. I do indeed still. You are a member of the family." That word made me want to shout. Family with what family? The family that turned their back on me during my growing up. The family that only contacts me in need of something. Yes, I was a member of the family, but only when it suited them. They turned their backs on me a long time ago. I said, sounding a bit bitter, that I was finally walking away. On the other end of the line, there was quiet. Nick sighed and said he'd tell them. He hung up the phone and just sat there, staring at the wall. He was trying to sort everything out. Part of him wanted to scream and throw something, to let all the pent-up frustration fly free. He still felt that way. I just felt lazy, quite tired, honestly. I finished writing their backup plan, and I was done being invisible when it was convenient. Then, when things got tough, I expected to step up. A few days went by, and I never heard from Nick or my folks. They seemed to be waiting for me to come to my senses and be the excellent daughter they had decided I should be. I could change my mind, but I wasn't going to move. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. I got a letter in the mail. I had my own life, and I wasn't going to let them dump their problems on me. My mom sent me a letter. It was long and disorganized, like something from the 1800s. It was full of guilt-tripping, and it said I needed to be around more. She also said that my family needed me and that they were struggling. She didn't say what they needed from me or why I should stick around. The line in the letter that really got to me was when she wrote, "Emily, we are not asking for much." That's when it hit me. Someone will cover for the family when we're away. This wasn't about missing me or asking me to be in their daily life. It was about their desire for someone to tidy up after they left. Convenience was driving this, not love or connection. Since I was the only one who wasn't falling apart, I was the one they were looking to mend things. I ripped the letter up and threw it away. I thought I'd reached my limit when I folded up that letter from my mother. I'm done. I've had enough. Years of neglect, using me when it was convenient, and now they want me to take on their responsibilities. No way. I tossed the letter and blocked their number. I blocked it, but a few weeks later, I knocked on the door. It was a weekday, and I didn't expect anyone. I first thought it might be a delivery, but when I opened the door, my mother showed up. She was just standing there, like she had a right to be on my front porch. I stopped, not sure whether to hear her out or shut the door in her face. She looked different, maybe older, maybe more worn out. Whatever it was, she wasn't the same woman I grew up with. I couldn't tell if it was the years. I was still stressed, but I felt no compassion for her. I asked her, "Is this where you're working?" She didn't reply right away. She just stood there staring at me as though she knew no longer who I was. She finally said, "We need to talk, Emily." I groaned. "No, we truly do not," I said. "I have said all I need to have said." She stepped forward as though she were going to enter, but I didn't move. I have decided not to follow all the guilt trips and trickery. She was about to let her in when her voice softened. She knew I wouldn't move. "Your father's condition is getting worse. He's in and out of the hospital. We have no idea how long he has left." My Emily, I had no idea what to do. That was the card she had been waiting to play. The card with "your father is dying." She said nothing straightforward, but I understood what she was trying to communicate. Look, I am not merciless. I didn't want my dad to suffer, but after all they had subjected me to, I couldn't simply drop everything. I apologized, trying to keep my voice calm. "This isn't my issue. Years of figuring this out have gone between you and Dad. You can't turn to me right now and expect me to make everything right." She looked at me as though I had smacked her. "I'm not calling for your fixing of anything. I need you there for the family." The word family again. I nearly laughed. Which family? The one who turned away from me 25 years ago. The one that only speaks with me when I need something. Mom. That family is not what we have. It was manipulation for a moment. I thought she'd dispute with me, but she just started crying right then on my doorstep. My mother started crying, and I knew I had to do something, even though I couldn't just stand there and watch her weep. I wasn't going to invite her in. "Look," I said, my voice softening. "I understand this presents challenges for you. I do, I really do. I'm not your backup strategy. It's not me who will visit and bring everything under control. You made the choice, and now you have to live with the consequences." She dried her eyes, looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw the rage flash across her face. "Emily, we did the best we could. You're not aware of what it was like raising all of you and juggling everything. We were trying to keep everyone else alive, so we ran out of time for you." It's the same justification I've heard a million times before. My voice was solid, and that's not my fault. You decided to have 5 children. You decided to drop me behind. Focus on the other people in the family, not me. That was your choice, and right now you're trying to shame me about it. Mom, I'm not going to do it. She looked at me for a long time as though she no longer recognized me. Maybe in her mind I was still the quiet student who never made problems and could be overlooked since I didn't need her. But that youngster was gone. I wasn't invisible, and I wasn't going to let them use me to clean up their mess. That's it. Her voice was cold. She asked at last, "Are you just going to ignore us?" I looked at her straight in the eye and said, "No. Head nod yes. Many years ago you turned away from me." She said nothing. Following that, "I'm just finally walking away." She merely turned and headed back toward her car, feeling a strange mix of feelings. I stood in the doorway watching her go, though most of me felt liberated. Part of me was depressed, of course. I was like I had at last let go of something weighing years down on me. Something I ought to have long ago let go. I walked back inside and sat down, trying to sort through everything after she left. I lost my anger. Not even. I was hurt, but I was only carried out under the shame, manipulation, and continual sense of inadequacy. I had a life to live, and I was not going to let them pull me back into their mess. The next several weeks passed silently. There were no letters, calls, or SMSs. They seemed to have at last realized I would not be returning. Indeed, it felt as though a great weight had been taken off my shoulders. I concentrated on my job, my friends, and my life. I was not looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next guilt trip. I was not following long. I was no longer living under the shadow of their expectations. Roughly 1 month later, Nick emailed me. It was brief, just a few sentences. It said, "Dad died last night. I'm not sure how to feel." I stared at the email for a long time. I knew this was en route, but I didn't find it surprising. I felt neither depressed nor happy. At first, I thought about calling Nick to see how he was doing and maybe even offering my condolences. But then I realized that this was just another step in the same cycle. Another chance for them to pull me back in. And I wasn't going to fall for it again. I closed the email without responding and carried on with my day. I was finally okay with not being in their world anymore.